Really glad you're here. So let me introduce Elizabeth Cohn Stuntz, who will be known as Liz today. She's a social worker and a psychotherapist in private practice in Westchester, New York. She has a very interesting background that combines psychoanalytic training, studying Zen Buddhism, the application of neuroscience to therapy, and then, of course, dialectical behavior therapy, as she's the author of this book, Coping with Cancer, with the founder of DBT, Marsha Linehan. Um, After many years of involvement in services for people with cancer and her own experience of that disease, she developed a program of coping skills based on DBT. She also has her private practice. She serves in the faculty of the Westchester Center for Psychoanalytic uh, Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy, is involved in different kind of cancer support groups, and is the author of a book that just got published this month called Coping with Cancer, DBT Skills to Manage Your Emotions and Balance Uncertainty with Hope, again, written with Marsha Linehan. And she's going to be presenting the webinar on this topic for us on April the 9th. As I've said, if you register for that, you get a copy of her book, an e-copy. So I'm out of breath, and I'm going to welcome you, Liz, to the screen. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so questions for you. I'm always curious how people got into this field of therapy and helping others. And I know you took a psychology degree at Cornell. You went on to get a MSW at Smith College, moved on to psychoanalysis and these other interests. So take us through how Liz got from there to here, please.
I have been working primarily with children and adolescents, is where I started my clinical career. And then I realized that if you're working with young children, you have to work with your parents. So that's when I did my psychoanalytic certification, so that I could work with adults as well as children. Lots of my work in early years was working with adolescents and their families, working with them clinically, supervising other people doing that. And for many years, I've taught a course on treatment of adolescents to other clinicians. And it's my work with adolescents that really first brought me to DBT. So DBT, for anybody who doesn't know, stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy, and was created by Marsha Linehan, who is my co-author. Marsha is an amazing woman, and actually been named in a new issue of Time magazine as one of the geniuses and visionaries whose work has transformed our world. She's actually one of the few living people in that edition. The rest are Freud and Copernicus and Galileo. But anyway, Marsha was named in this because her coping skills that she has developed have been researched very carefully and proven effective to help people cope better and be more resilient. As I was working with adolescents, and even though I came from a strong psychoanalytic background, I realized that a lot of the pieces of DBT, which included validating another perspective, seeing what else is true, for parents with adolescents and even for us clinicians, working with an adolescent and seeing that there's always a kernel of truth in that of what they're saying, I found to be a really important clinical message. And looking at things that there's been work developed on treatment of adolescents that using DBT, that things are not one way or the other, that an adolescent is not simply a rebellious, terrible acting out kid. There's more to the story than that. And DBT always focused looking at a fuller story. And so while the psychodynamic approaches are really useful, the actual coping skills are also useful, both ways. So I did a course and studied DBT with Linehan. Um, and then Linehan was offering mindfulness meditation retreats for clinicians. And I signed up to do that. They're silent meditation retreats, and they're all for clinicians. And I've been doing that for the past 11 or 12 years, twice a year. And Linehan, even though I was from a psychoanalytic background and most everyone else was from a DBT background, Linehan is a Zen master, and Zen is about being open to all experience and all clinical perspectives. So she was very interested in what I had to say and welcoming to me, and not that it's one way or the other clinically, or even in psychological perspectives. So that was really our bond about an openness to other perspectives. Somewhere in those retreats, I'm also a cancer survivor and had been a part of on a founding board of a cancer support organization. And in my non-professional hat, had always worked on services for cancer patients. And during one of those silent retreats, it occurred to me that maybe DBT skills would be helpful for patients living with cancer. And I said to Linehan, can we try this? And she said, go try it. So we did, and piloted them in a cancer support organization where they were very well received. So that's my journey.
So just to,
Long, lots of twists.
that's okay, we got the time. So just to clarify, so your own cancer experience was before your experience with DBT, or is it?
No, let me think about that. Yes. I think I knew some about DBT, but I was not involved with DBT clinically before I was diagnosed.
And if I'm wondering if you had been involved with DBT or read someone's book that was your book, how would that change your experience when you were going through your cancer?
Well, I hope that my book would um, be something that would change people's experience with cancer. One of the some of the feedback I've gotten that's meant the most to me of so many people saying, "I wish I had this book when I was diagnosed." Um, so I hope it would have made a big difference. The pieces that we cover. Some of the most important concepts that I would hope would make a difference. First is that there's no right or wrong way to cope, that we all have our own unique style, and there's no one way we should do that's right for us. So validating each person's experience. Our book offers coping skills, but we offer them. It's not you should do this. It's using what Linehan calls your own wise mind to decide what's useful for you, so that there are potential ways to deal with that. The focus in our book is about making difficult decisions. And there we talk a lot about the mindfulness skills of really paying careful attention to what's happening, which is way easier said than done, so that we can make wise decisions without being too emotional or avoiding our emotions and what's happening. Then there are 4 chapters on regulating our emotions. And what I hope would have been helpful to me and other cancer patients is to understand that our fear and anxiety, our sadness, anger, are understandable emotions. There's nothing wrong with having those feelings. They're there for really good reasons. But what happens is that sometimes they get to be more intense than is useful. And one of the things that I have found so helpful with DBT, and I hope cancer patients will find helpful in this book, is that there are concrete ways that people can regulate those emotions and bring down the temperature on our anxiety, our fear, our sadness, our anger, when they're more intense than is useful for us. Then there are a couple of chapters on relationships. people, when they're diagnosed with cancer, often feel like their relationships are very different, and how to understand that, and their actual communication strategies, both to deal with our loved ones, how to talk to our colleagues, how to communicate around about chemo brain and what we're afraid to share with our colleagues, and also how to talk with our doctors. And then the last chapter is includes issues of spirituality. When people are diagnosed with cancer, the issues of what sustains them and what's most meaningful to them is very important. So that we talk about ways that people can live meaningfully, however long they're going to live, and live in ways where they're doing and connecting to the things that are most important and the people that are most important and nourishing to them.
Yeah, I'm curious, Liz. So you had your cancer experience. You saw the value of DBT. Did you start? Tell us about how you started using that, either in your practice as a therapist, or I know you're a founding member of Gilda's, whatever you call it, in Westchester for cancer. Do you have, I wonder, a case example you could share of someone where you could see this is really helping this person?
Well, one of the essential pieces about DBT is the whole notion of dialectics. Dialectics is really a 50-cent word that means things are not one way or the other. Um, One of the things that we see and we can feel is that we can get hopeless, and we can not connect to our own feeling of, oh my goodness, is this going to be okay? Whether we're given a really intense diagnosis or not, people right away go to, am I going to die? Is this going to be okay? DBT speaks to that. It did for me, and I have seen it do that for lots of other people, because it doesn't oversimplify the situation as one way or the other. When we're diagnosed, people are rarely simply totally fine. They're not. They've just been given a cancer diagnosis, or they're rarely immediately dying. But we can tend to make things very black and white. And if we see things as one way or the other, one of the values of DBT is that we see that both, more than one thing can be true, that we can be terrified and hopeful at the same time, that we can feel like we're just in the darkness, but we can remember to see that light still exists as well. So it's a way of broadening our perspective to think about ways to remember that there is also hope. And I'm not just talking about positive psychology, look on the bright side. That's not where I'm going. I'm talking more about a balanced perspective. And when we have taught these skills to people, they very much appreciate it. It's not just, oh, be grateful and it's all wonderful. It's not. It's really understandable to be stressed when you have cancer. But when you're looking at a fuller, balanced perspective, you can remember that while this is a really scary time and things are really upsetting, there are positive things in your life, that you can be strong and weak at the same time, that you can be frightened and hopeful at the same time, and that you can be confused how to cope and learn new ways to cope at the same time.
Well, you talk about being scary, and you've also on your website, you talk about the importance of emotions, and you said emotions have a bad reputation. And there's few things that cause more emotions than a cancer diagnosis for an individual or a family. I know I had my cancer episodes about 20 years ago, and I remember them very well. So emotions are there. So how do you deal with emotions in therapy with either someone going through cancer and or their family?
So the first part is to understand and respect those emotions. Those emotions are there for understandable reasons, and not to say, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be this, I shouldn't feel this, and I shouldn't feel that. We are frightened. We are anxious. We might be sad. We might be angry. And to accept that those emotions are there for valid, understandable reasons, and they even give us important messages about what we should do. But one of the pieces about DBT is based on the long wisdom of Zen. Marcia is a Zen master, and the wisdom has now been validated by neuroscience. The neuroscience expression in emotions is name it to tame it. In DBT, Marcia talks about observing and labeling what you're feeling. One of the most important pieces that I learned in DBT that I use with cancer patients, but in all patients in my practice, is helping patients identify and name what they're feeling. Because the research is for cancer patients who can understand and label their feelings, they not only cope better, but have had shown to have less inflammation. But even with our patients who are not cancer patients, when we can help them label, I'm scared, I'm worried, I'm anxious, that physiologically has been shown to calm the central nervous system. So that's a great way to regulate emotions.
So you talk about labeling emotions, and there's some therapies that encourage people to feel the emotions in the therapy room, get into those emotions, dig deep into those emotions, and others deal other ways with emotions. What would, if I was looking at one of your sessions with one of your clients, what would I see?
You would see that I would encourage people to focus on their body, what they're feeling. Is their heart racing? You know, are their muscles tense? To recognize their own experience that way, and to name it. But then you wouldn't see in my therapy a way to get into it further, because for some patients that's useful and some patients that's really traumatizing. So one of the crucial pieces about DBT and the way I work is whether it's useful. It's useful to first feel the emotion, because frankly the research is that trying to avoid emotions doesn't work and only intensifies them. And if you tell somebody don't feel that way, first of all, it's impossible to do. And it makes them worse. It's like saying, don't think about that pink elephant over there. You just end up thinking about it more. So what you would see in my work is allowing it and having it be there, but then say, is it getting in your way? Okay, now that it's there, in a perfect world, we let it come and allow it. I'm opening my hand rather than fighting it. And so allowing it, and then to say, is it hanging on too long? And if it's hanging on too long, then I would work with patients about some of the skills that can help them to lessen it when it's hanging on, the anger, the sadness, whatever the emotion is, longer than it is useful. So some of the ways then to bring it down is to also look at what thoughts and assumptions that we have that are maintaining our emotions. Actually, an emotion physiologically from neuroscience only lasts 90 seconds. So it comes. And the things that keep it after those 90 seconds are often what our body is all still revved up. So I do teach ways to calm your body down, and taking a longer exhale can lower your central nervous system, or muscle relaxation can do that. But also our thoughts, and our thoughts and assumptions and our opinions that this is terrible, this shouldn't be happening, I shouldn't be coping like this, my husband shouldn't be doing this, all get in the way. So different ways to check our assumptions. Is that really true? I think that's true. And what else am I not considering in this perspective? So to both take a larger picture of what's happening and to check our facts about whether all those things we're thinking are really true. When we have cancer, we make all these assumptions about the future. This is going to happen and that. We can't, those, none of those are true because we can't know what the future is going to be. But yet all of those ideas are panicking us more. So helping people look at those things that are keeping that anxiety going after it's motivated us to take care of ourselves, just keeping it churning and churning is not so useful anymore.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up for questions. So just repeat, if you have a question, there's a few things you can do. And we'd love your questions, comments, feedback. In the chat box on your screen, you can just say, I have a question, and Emily will be moderating this. You can use the wave function in the participants part of on your screen where it says wave, or you can go like that and Emily will moderate. So wondering who would like to start with a question or thought or share an experience with us all. Give you.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Greg.
Yes. Hi, how are you? Hi. Elizabeth, my wife had cancer, and as a registered marriage and family therapist, I'm interested in what you have written in those chapters about relationships. I know that Dorothy was very specific about when she wanted me to take her to treatment in Hamilton at Yaravinsky, and then other times, no. She started out with radiation. She wanted to drive herself to the treatment, but when it came to the chemo, please come with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering about those dynamics of relationship that maintain a healthy road to cancer treatment.
So the first part is that everyone's different, and every couple is different, as you certainly know from your work. Linehan talks about that some of us, there's a spectrum of how we respond as individuals and as couples, and some of us tend more on the emotional side. We're going to focus on the emotions, and that's our initial way of doing things, and that's the way we lead. We maybe want to talk more about it and feel more about it and discuss more about it. And then there are those of us that are more focused on the facts, the logic, maybe more private, and finding a way to balance those in a couple or any dyad. If those coping styles don't match, that can be very difficult for people. And DBT puts out very specific skills about how to communicate and let your loved ones know what you want and what you need and what you don't need, while also protecting your own sense of dignity, because there's a lot, we talk a lot in the book about the difference between needing and being needy. And people make a lot of judgments about themselves and have a lot of assumptions. They can have judgments like, oh, when you're sick with cancer, you are often more dependent on other people. And we have a whole set of myths in our mind of, I'm going to drive my loved one away, or they're patronizing me, or they're cheerleading too much and they're not respectful of me. So we go through a whole bunch of series of myths that people have and give concrete skills about how to say to one's partner, colleagues, or doctors, what you need and what you don't need in that way. Does that speak to what you're?
It does a bit, yeah, without question.
Other parts you want to ask?
I think I just want to learn as you speak, to be honest. But I just know that
it's even for those of us in the field, communicating that way in intimate relationships is very difficult. And our assumptions about the other, one of the pieces that we say and ask people to consider, both the loved ones and the person living with cancer, is what am I not considering? Trying to think about it from the other person's shoes. Could your wife have felt, oh, I'm imposing on him? Or is it okay to ask? Or am I going to alienate him? We have no idea, and we can't be mind readers to know what the other person is thinking.
Right. My sense is that Dorothy, in wanting to drive herself to radiation, and it's an hour drive, and it gave her a sense of having some sense of personal control.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. That's certainly a good option, and that may be right. But one of the things that we say, there's a thing in DBT called check the facts. What are your assumptions? We make assumptions about other people. So one of the things that we say in the book all the time is, ask your loved one, tell them.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what I'm wanting to respect what you want and need. Is this right?
And that's exactly what happened in my relationship with Dorothy. I said, what do you want? And I'm there.
But it's not always so easy for Dorothy or any of the rest of us to say, this is what I want and what I need. And the ideas we have about I'm being too needy, I'm going to burn him out, whatever, the millions of kinds of assumptions that we can have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good clinical insight. What, to explore the assumptions and what do you see and feel as your needs.
Right. But not to expect that she can answer that right away. We don't always know. Part of the earlier chapters is to help people focus on what they to know their own heart and mind, because that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Greg. Well, we have a lot of questions, so we're going to move on.
Jennifer has a question, and she wanted to get it in before she heads to work. So, Jennifer, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting scrubbed up to get to work. But the question, thank you for taking my question next. So I'm a daughter supporting a 78-year-old mother that has metastatic breast cancer and has been very stable for 10 years on a really good oral chemo or oral drug. And so now, serendipitously, we found some new lesions in the lung. And so we've done lots of testing in the last week. And I'm really recognizing that the strategy has been kind of an avoidance, but like out of sight, out of mind. Like we talk about it openly, 6-month appointments come, and then as long as it's not in my face, we don't have to really talk about it. But now that it seems like the next stage is coming, or it's progressed a little bit different, I'm getting a lot of black and white thinking, a lot of all or nothing thinking, and a lot of anger. Like, this isn't a journey. This isn't fun. Who says it's a journey? I don't want to hear all the cheerleading talk about cancer. Mm-hmm. And so I think all of us are just kind of, you want to be supportive, but it's also how do you pivot that conversation to address the anger, the disappointment, that 10-year bubble looks like it's coming to a close, and now we're getting into more difficult conversations when cancer starts to evolve and change.
So the first part is listening. It's like what I said to the last man about listening to what's useful for her. The comment about I don't need so much cheerleading. You hear that a lot because a lot of us can feel like other people's wish to say it's going to be fine minimizes the patient's experience. So that's why you get I don't want to, the cheerleading. The piece about facing what's happening is a tough one. Because that's one of the hardest pieces. Do you have a sense that your mother is not realistically looking at what's happening, or feeling like you're cheerleading her too much, or both?
I feel like she has a somewhat fatalistic, like, when it's done, it's done. When my life's done, it's done. I just kind of want some quality before that happens, but not really being able to sit with the complexity that it's not all or nothing. It could be many things, and trying to get her to articulate that, or to support her around that is difficult.
We we have
Yeah.
our own ideas about what the cancer patient or should do. And remember how I said in the beginning, the most important piece is to listen and to validate her experience, so that when we validate the other person's experience and hear that it's not fun, that she just wants to enjoy that often is the most useful first step we can do. And when someone feels understood and validated and that we appreciate their perspective, that makes it easier for them to then look at a wider story. But the first step is to validate her experience and what it's like for her and to listen.
Well, thank you. Thanks for letting me go next, Emily. And thanks for
Thank
your
you, Jen.
wisdom.
Thank you,
I
Jennifer.
look forward to reading your book.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael.
The next question is Nicole. Nicole, did you want to ask your question? Let's get you unmuted.
Sure. Thank
Hi.
you. Hi.
Oh,
I'm really impressed by this and hearing the balancing of intelligent thoughts against emotions. And
it's not against, it's with.
I understand. Thank you.
And I know that it was, that word didn't matter, but the reason I nitpicked with you is that it's both. We need
That's
both.
what's so important.
That
I
I
understand.
talk about it as a seesaw. It's not one side or the other, but we look for that middle of having both.
I'm excited by the concepts you described in your book, and I'm curious if you can comment on how one could use some of these insights to speak to a late 20s daughter who has intense anxiety about a mother who's had many rounds of chemo and many close calls. I've tried to have meaningful conversation and she clams up and then just has these extended teary outbursts. And I don't know how to have a conversation with her where she'll volunteer how she feels. It just comes out in these waterfalls.
So again, the first rule is always listening to how she feels, and hearing that. And so this is my adolescent hat, that sometimes if we share how we feel, that if she's so frightened, if you share the places that you are also frightened and also hopeful. So share your own vulnerability, but you meet her first with her fear and share yours, but then say, I'm frightened and I'm hopeful. But if you have fully listened to her rather than trying to change her, and then shared your experience. Does that make some sense?
A lot. Thank you.
Thank you. When it's clear that a patient is dying, what have you found is the most helpful? What is most helpful for giving the person a sense of peace and safety?
Listening to what's most important to them. To again, it's about listening to what's most important to them, what gives them most comfort, helping them connect to what is physically and emotionally most meaningful to them.
Okay. Someone had their hand up, but we'll just move on to the next question. Tanya, are you there? Or she had a question about treatment with social distancing. So I'm wondering about how family and friends can support and help someone who's dealing with cancer treatment during COVID, social distancing, and even for those who live at a distance from loved ones.
That's a really good and important question, because even before the pandemic, one of the issues is that a cancer patient may not be able to work or socialize as much as they did before. And so the issue of feeling more alone and lonely was an issue before the pandemic. And obviously intensified here. But there are ways that we have learned with the pandemic of that we are all doing, cancer or no cancer, of reaching out to loved ones, Zoom calls, texting, I'm thinking about you, and being present in ways that we can, as often as we can. An email, text, I'm thinking about you. Can we set up a time for a Zoom call? Those kinds of things, and being as connected as possible. Because those are things that I would have said before the pandemic, and we need those same strategies here.
Okay. Have the skills been modified, or are they the same for DBT and DBTA?
The skills have been modified. When you read our book, you will see that the basic skills are there, but we deal with them with some modification. There are certain skills that we don't use at all for this. One of the central skills in DBT is about acceptance, and Marcia talks about it as radical acceptance. We definitely use the idea of acceptance with cancer, but we talk about it more in terms of facing rather than accepting. People, when you say accept that you have cancer, people can too quickly go to the myth that acceptance means you shouldn't fight the medical condition. So we talk about facing what's happening physically and emotionally. And there are other skills that we don't use at all. But yes, they are modified.
I believe it's Leor had a question. Leor, did you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Liz. My main question is, when a client is not willing to talk about their emotions at all, or they are not aware of them even, like, how do you even start the process of teaching them how to identify the emotions around it?
So I start with their body, of what they're feeling physically. Is their heart racing? Helping them identify the physical sensations of their experience, and I just start there. One of the reasons there are so many chapters on emotions is there's a separate chapter on fear and anxiety, separate one on sadness, a separate one on anger, to help all of us identify both the physical and emotional and thought pieces that go into that particular emotion. So I don't just stay with what are you feeling, what's the emotion, but what are I come to it through what are you thinking, and what are you feeling physically, and through their actions, and then bring that correlate into the emotions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's just I'm thinking about if someone doesn't want to face the emotions.
No, most
Same
of us
thing?
don't. Right.
Yeah,
So the
so the
first is
same
to
thing.
validate that.
Yeah.
When I say why was DBT useful for me, for an adolescent, for a standard thing that I had to do as an adolescent therapist is like, what does it feel like to be in this therapy room and not want to be here, and have your mother and father made you be here? Talking about, whoa, it kind of both accepting that, of course, they don't want to feel those emotions. Who could blame them? And validating that experience first. So going with validating exactly what they're feeling, not going against them, but seeing the world through their eyes. That's one of the ways you validate a patient. So you see the world through their eyes, and then you want to know their experience in all ways. So you start with what's their physical experience. What thoughts are they thinking? What actions are they doing, or what things are they avoiding? And then the question is, how's that working for you?
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, just building on that one, someone asked if you can explain more about chemo brain, and have you heard about chemo rage, and how can family members deal with it and help the person experiencing it cope as well?
So chemo brain does happen in more more frequently than we like to know, and that means that our thinking can be foggy. It can be hard to concentrate, and for many people living with cancer, it sometimes affects their capacity to work. So I talk about that in how to negotiate with your work thing. I haven't heard the term chemo rage, but two thoughts occurred to me. One is I'm not an MD, but I'm sure that there may be physiological pieces of certain medications that may do that. The other is that this is we have a whole chapter on anger and people's rage, and this is not a very pleasant situation for people. And when people are in pain, they are more likely to be angry, and we talk a lot about that in the chapter on anger. And living with cancer can make one very angry. So that there is rage and strong anger about living with cancer is really understandable.
Thank you. Rebecca has a question. Rebecca, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Great. So Liz, you were talking about, focusing on the emotion, but that sometimes actually scaling back to some degree. And so I'm wondering, what are indicators for you of when to actually back away from maybe like the somatic experience and not going, too deep and maybe too quickly? How do you determine how you pace your sessions, and understanding that some patients may not have obvious discomfort with going into the feeling? So what are some indicators for you of when you would maybe not go so deep?
I talk to the patient really directly. How's this working? Is this too much? Are we going too fast? Are you getting more upset? And gauge that I'm a partner with the patient about what's useful and what pace is useful. And I always think the best therapy work I do is when I let the patient teach me and pace me. But leave a respectful tension. If a patient is saying completely, let's stay away, then I would go to the effective question. We can stay away from that, and I can see why you would want to. And, how's that working and what's it costing us? Does that answer you?
It does, yes. Thank you. Just communication.
Yes. But I do it directly, right with the patient. I am very straight talking about that.
So Naomi says your combination of psychoanalysis and DBT is interesting. I'm curious how your analytic background informs or affects your DBT practice.
It definitely does. I focus more on the relationship and what are the dynamics between the people and what are the underlying. DBT talks about the thoughts that are behind it, but the underlying assumptions that I'll focus more on that as from my analytic background.
Susan has a question. Susan, did you want to unmute and ask your question? So Susan, and I have a feeling the answer might have something to do with communication. How does one get... Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi, I made it. It just took a while to find the scroll, the little button. Didn't get it on. So my question is, getting the doctor to maybe be better at navigating the emotional piece of palliative only treatment and the ongoing testing that goes with that,
Mhm.
and the ongoing reminding of, well, this is this, and these are the statistics, and so probably, you have X number of time left, that kind of stuff.
I'm-
And also then parents who,
I'm not sure I understood your question.
maybe it would be better if I just read what I wrote. How does one get or invite their doctor to hear what is needed emotionally in visits while going over results in palliative-only treatments? Is
So,
that more clear?
yeah, yes. So there are very clear DBT skills about how to communicate. And part of communicating is understanding the other person's perspective, including the doctor's perspective, but clearly presenting your own perspective, which is that this part is important. Like in the vignette, in the example, you're saying the doctor is focusing only on palliative. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah. So then to be very clear that it feels to me like you're focusing only on the palliative, and this is what's important to me, to know that I have other options, and to express to the doctor what it feels like for you to have them not offered. And we go through there's a whole series, an acronym of how to communicate that, which means both understanding the doctor's perspective and clearly saying, this is how it feels to me when when I don't get offered other options. And,
Okay.
where one might feel I don't want to put words in this person's, I feel disregarded. Don't feel respected when I'm not giving options. I function better when I have choices, those kinds of things.
Okay. And then the other question was dealing with parents who have control issues and who are trying to, in the relationship with a daughter who has stage 4 breast cancer.
Parents
And
who are, what are they trying to do?
parent, the parent continues to want to step in and take over, even though they're both adults. One is 90, the other is almost 70.
Mhm. So,
And it's not what the daughter wants.
right. So a lot of it is about appreciating the other's perspective and appreciating that those controlling parents may feel also very helpless and out of control. That whether you're 70, 90, whatever age, having a loved one have cancer, that many of us feel very helpless in those situations, and understanding that it comes from good intention, that may be very annoying, but that it may come from their feeling of feeling helpless and out of control. And so one might do something like, I can appreciate that it might be hard when you feel out of, that there's not things that you can do and that you're only trying to be helpful. And this is how it is from my perspective, but also try to appreciate the other person's perspective. Does that make some sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
does.
I think we have time for one last question. One question that came up is, do you have a suggestion for something easy to do with a person receiving chemo? I'm a hospital spiritual care provider in the oncology department, and it would be so wonderful to offer something at the time of receiving treatment.
Something around there are a lot of possibilities, but what's the goal of it? Is it a spiritual something? I'm not sure.
I'm
what
the one that's
objective.
Hi, Anne. Yeah, Anne's here to answer your questions.
Hi.
Yeah, I guess because I'm so interested in what the dialectic side of it, and I'm thinking that I meet with people in the oncology department, and sometimes It's just something in the moment, that I can offer. Maybe it's a mindfulness practice, knowing that I'm in an oncology area and there's multiple people receiving chemo all at the same time, or being infused with plasma, blood products, that kind of thing. Something in the moment that maybe recognizing that emotionally they're in turmoil, spiritually they're in turmoil, that I can look after. But it's one of maybe the mindfulness practices or something that we can do in the chair. Do you know what I mean? At the moment.
There are a bunch of things in the book that way, but I'm reluctant to do a one because it's not a one size fits all. It's what the person needs, and I was stumbling about what was your objective to offer. And I think my own response is there's not one thing to offer everybody. So it's what are you assessing is the need, and then I could talk to you about different options to offer. But even in our whole book, we start and saying there's not one way to go, that these are all a whole series. It's a menu of suggestions, almost like a Chinese menu, and pick the ones that work for you. And so that's why I would be reluctant to say, here's one practice that will work for everyone.
Thank you very much for that. That's what I need to hear. And yeah, I've ordered your book too, just because I spend a majority of my time. I'm also an Anglican priest, but a majority of my time in the oncology area and those at end of life as well. So thank you for that comment. And I look forward to seeing what else I can put in my toolbox.
Hopefully it helps.
Well, we're going to close in a moment, Liz. I want to thank you for first writing this book and bringing these issues for discussion among therapists. I think it's terrific that we've had this opportunity. You can have almost the last word, because what we do after your word is open up our microphones. We always give everyone a chance to say thank you and goodbye. It gets a little bit noisy, but it's a way for us to be together in a strange kind of way. So Liz, do you have some closing words?
Just to thank you all, and thank you all for your important work in helping so many people living with cancer.
Thank you so much.
Okay, microphone's open, and thanks for joining us, your questions, your listening, and everything else. Thanks for being part of our community.
Thank you very